Kia ora and welcome to the HRPI. I'm Marie Tovio, Employment Relations Consultant and HR Strategist. Today's investigation takes us into recruitment and what happens when you get it wrong. We've all been there. You hire someone who looks great on paper, interviews well, and seems like the right fit. But within weeks, things start to unravel. They don't deliver, they clash with others, or they simply don't seem interested. And the cost of a bad hire? It's more than just salary. Let's break it down. When you hire the wrong person, you lose time, morale, productivity, and money. It affects your team culture, adds pressure to others, and forces you to repeat the recruitment process, often urgently and sometimes in damage control mode. So how do you avoid this? Start by being clear about the role. My clients often hear me talk about getting clarity, and that's because it's so important. Do you need to replace the role at all, as it was, or is this an opportunity to make changes that might better fit where the business or industry is heading? A vague job description leads to vague expectations, and that sets everyone up for failure. More on that later. Define not only the tasks, but also the key behaviours you need for success. Include information about the level of responsibility, where the role sits in the structure, whether or not it has any staff responsibilities, and note the expected level of decision-making that the role has. It's important to be clear about the specific skills and behaviours that will really make a difference, rather than include a long shopping list, which could just make attracting and selecting the right candidate difficult. Throughout the process, you need to make sure you meet your legal obligations, such as those under the Privacy Act. Next, design a robust recruitment process. That includes clear and concise adverts placed in the right media and/or on the right platforms, screening CVs for actual relevance, not just the buzzwords. Using an application form can help eliminate candidates that don't fit the role criteria or highlight things that will need some follow-up in an interview or at other stages of the process. A robust recruitment process also means asking behavioural interview questions. Things like, tell me about a time you dealt with a difficult customer, instead of just, are you good under pressure? And use a panel of 2 or 3. These things help the recruiting manager avoid only hiring people like themselves, instead of honing in on what the role really needs. Always check references, and make those reference checks meaningful. Check that the referees proposed by the candidate are going to be relevant to your vacancy and questions. If there's someone else you would prefer to speak to, you have to get the candidate's permission, and make sure the candidate is letting the referees know to expect your call. Ask specific questions. Check details the candidate has provided, and check things like how the person's performance was measured and reviewed. And don't forget to confirm the basic facts like employment dates, role titles, and responsibilities. Another tool I recommend is psychometric testing, and in particular, extended DISC. It helps you understand a candidate's natural behavioural style, how they're likely to communicate, and what environments they thrive in. It's not about right or wrong, it's about fit. For example, if you're hiring for a high customer contact role, someone who prefers low interaction may not thrive long term. Also, include a practical task or simulation in your interview process, and make sure it's not an actual task that another employee would otherwise have to carry out, because it could then be determined that your candidate has started doing work for you. So, the task or simulation could be a case study, a mock client email, or a short presentation. You can set a time limit to simulate the time pressures in the role. It shows you how they think, not just what they say. It's important to remember that information can only be gathered that relates to the role and organisation requirements. For some roles, additional checks might be appropriate, such as a credit check or a criminal record check. If driving is a role requirement, for example, you will want to check the candidate has a valid licence and no criminal convictions or outstanding charges related to driving. Depending on your workplace policies and the health and safety requirements related to the role, You may also want your candidate to undertake a medical assessment or testing, such as a pre-employment drug test. Where you are going to require testing for at least your preferred candidate, make sure you mention this as a part of your selection process early on, such as in the vacancy advert or on the application form. The candidate will ultimately need to give their consent before undertaking a medical test or assessment, and for the medical practitioner to release their information to you. And finally, always allow for a cultural fit check. Introduce the candidate to future potential colleagues. Walk them around. Show them the work environment they would work in. See how they engage. Sometimes those informal moments are the most telling. Another time, I'll talk about offers and onboarding, which are also both very important. But to conclude today's investigation into how to get recruitment right, I do want to add 2 more tips. The first of these is to not hold on to information gathered during the recruitment process once a decision is made. This information is considered to be evaluative material, so you must otherwise destroy it following the recruitment process, unless you have the candidate's permission to hold on to it. You can get their permission on the application form. It needs to be in writing. The second note I want to make is that employers have an obligation to check information provided and carry out appropriate checks and assessments, rather than relying solely on what a candidate tells them. Employers can also include details on application forms and in employment agreements about the potential consequences of a candidate not providing honest information during the recruitment process. This can include that where it is later found that a candidate has lied or withheld pertinent information, it can impact whether their application will be progressed, or if already employed, it could impact their ongoing employment. However, employers should not rely on this in place of thorough selection processes. Why? The test is always what could a fair and reasonable employer do in the circumstances, and in recruitment, they can carry out assessments and do appropriate checks. Also, proving the person deliberately withheld relevant information or lied can be difficult, and before any decision about their ongoing employment could be made, when they're already on board, a fair process would need to be followed. And that can also be the time that your selection processes will come under scrutiny. I often help clients address performance issues with an employee who's not long out of their trial period, who just can't do what they said they could in their CV or during their recruitment process. It's not uncommon that in these cases, I also find that the employee wasn't really clear about what the role was until some months down the track. Some further clarification of the role, as well as more assessments and checks during recruitment, could have resulted in a different decision, and that would have benefited both parties. Addressing underperformance is usually a time-consuming and costly process, as is repeating recruitment processes when things haven't worked out. So, what are today's takeaways? 1. A bad hire costs more than you think, so invest time up front and don't rush the process. If in any doubt, do not make an offer. 2. Use behavioural interviews, have a panel, do reference checking, and apply testing tools. 3. Be clear about role expectations and what success looks like. 4. Don't skip cultural fit. It's often what makes or breaks a new hire. The information in this podcast is provided as a general overview of key employment topics and does not replace tailored advice. Every situation is different, and the appropriate steps can vary depending on the specific circumstances. If you're unsure about how to proceed in your workplace, I encourage you to seek advice and support. Feel free to get in touch with me directly. That's it for today's HR investigation. Subscribe to the HRPI for more practical tools to protect and empower your workplace. I'm Marito Vio. Mā te wā.